I'm sure you all know the drill at this stage. However, I am aiming for 10,000 subscribers at some point this year. So if you could help me out, if you haven't already, make sure that you click that subscribe button and I'd love you forever. Anyway, let's get into the latest episode of Ranking Doctor Who. So I've done regeneration scenes, which technically is the first scene of a Doctor and also last of another one, but this time I'm talking specifically about the first story to feature every single one of the Doctors. Now, some people might say, well, technically this isn't the first appearance because they did appear in the previous story, but I'm talking about specifically this Doctor's dedicated first episode. So, for an example, Peter Capaldi's first appearance is Deep Breath, even though he did technically first appear in Day of the Doctor, because I know there's going to be someone in the comments who is pedantic about it. However, yes, it's just going to be the post-regeneration stories or a Doctor's first appearance. As always, this video is just my opinion, so if you happen to disagree, I don't care. Have your opinion, I'm not trying to change your mind. Let's start off then with Time and Interrani. In a very similar way to the regeneration scenes, I really don't fucking like this story, and I would argue that it is probably one of the worst, if not the worst, of the 80s. Okay, maybe not the worst, but it's definitely in the conversation. This story is just laughably bad, to the point where I have no desire to ever rewatch it again. In terms of introductions for a new Doctor, I actually kind of like some of the aspects to it. I like the bit where Sylvester is randomly changing through his predecessor's outfits, and I also quite like the way that the Rani tricks the Doctor in his sort of mental state that she's Mel, and that has a few laughs every now and again. But apart from that, there isn't really much about this story that I can talk to you about and say, yeah, that's good. I just feel like this is a laughable example of Doctor Who, and it came at a time when the BBC were clearly trying to get rid of it, and it shows. Season 24, I think, is the worst season of Classic Who, arguably of all time, so there's no reason why this wouldn't be here. Next up, sticking with the 80s, The Twin Dilemma. Now again, this is just not a very good example of a Doctor Who story. The main reason being is because it's fucking boring. That's one thing I always say about Doctor Who. Doctor Who can be bad, but never be boring. The two guys who play the twins, they're fucking terrible. The production values of this story are really bad. Yes, it did follow after Caves of Androzani, however, even if this story came after a somewhat crap story or just a decent story, it still wouldn't look that good. The idea of the Doctor being unrecognisable as a character, and he's trying to figure out who he really is, and he does have these spurts of where he's a coward or he's aggressive or, you know, all these things that traditionally aren't associated with the Doctor. I think the idea, absolutely do that. The execution, oh my god, no. Why is he strangling Perry? That's not a good look. Especially because, it doesn't really make that much of a difference now, because, you know, we can just watch the next episode on DVD or Blu-ray or on BritBox, wherever else. But at the time, the audience would have seen the Doctor strangle his companion, be incredibly unlikable, and then have to wait several months until they see him again. Chances are most people probably wouldn't want to see more from this character. And I think it really set up the Sixth Doctor to fail right from the get-go, which is unfair because Colin's Doctor is actually very, very good, but his introduction does him no justice whatsoever. I feel really bad because I do love 1980s Doctor Who, and I do think it has some of the best stories out there. However, in terms of a Doctor's first appearance, no. Now we're going with Castrovalva. See, the problem is with this story is I like the start of it. I think it isn't really until we go into Castrovalva itself that I am actually enjoying the story. But after Castrovalva, like going to there, I just totally lose interest in this story. I like Davison's post-regeneration stuff. I like where he's unraveling the scarf, he's quoting his predecessors, he's wandering around the TARDIS all dazed and confused. I really like the Zero Room. I like the fact that Adric is captured by the Master as well, that's pretty cool. And I also like the fact that the TARDIS is going to collide with, what is it, the beginning of the universe or something? Then after that, this story just becomes incredibly dull. Davison as a performer, I actually really like in this story. And it's a similar thing with For to Doomsday, the next story. Like, him as the Doctor, I enjoy. The story around him isn't really all that well enjoyable. See, I've kind of based this not necessarily on the quality of the story, but the likelihood of me revisiting these stories, and these are the bottom three without a shadow of a doubt. I have no desire to watch any of these stories again. But the next two stories, I also don't really have that much of a desire to rewatch. So, next, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. This story is a summary for me of why Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who doesn't quite work. It's got way too much going on, with very little actually happening, and it is way too heavy on the dialogue. So, take this as a prime example. Now, the whole idea of Tim Shaw, he's coming to Earth and he's going to hunt down a human. Okay, I'm on board with that. Why do we have another character there, whose name I don't remember, by the way? Why is it this random fucker who he's going after, and the Doctor and these people who suddenly are now her companions? Why are they why is it not Ryan? Why is it not Yaz, Graham, even Grace? Why isn't it one of these people, so it feels like the plot is intertwined with these two sets of people, as in the Doctor and these new companions? Why aren't they linked together with the whole Tim Shaw thing? It just feels like these people are just there for the ride. The bombs in the neck, it's just another Chris Chibnall countdown thing. That doesn't really work. I think in terms of the traditional post-regeneration stuff with the Doctor, it hits every beat, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's part of the story. It's like the Doctor's overly energetic and then passes out for a bit, but still nothing really happens. This story very much feels like talk for a bit, move, talk for a bit, move, talk for a bit, episode's over. It just didn't really click with me, this episode, and I do think that Jodie is borderline cringy, actually no, full-on cringeworthy in a few scenes, particularly when she first lands through the train and she can't remember the word tongue and is like, smart boy, biology, and I'm like, I've literally just vomited in my mouth a little bit the way that she's delivered that line. As opening episodes go, I'm willing to accept that it doesn't have to be incredible, but this is still arguably one of the better stories of Series 11, which goes to show how truly crap that series is in my mind. I do like the cliffhanger though, I will say that. The bit where they're just out there in space, I must admit I was intrigued to see what happens next. Unfortunately, the Ghost Monument is one of the shittest episodes of Series 11, so that went nowhere. Sticking with the new series, Christmas Invasion. Again, a story that I just don't really want to revisit all that much. For the majority of the episode, the Doctor isn't even there, and he isn't really doing anything. Yes, that does work, but I feel like you don't really get to know this new Doctor properly. It's just sort of like a few moments here and there where he'll wake up and do stuff, and it's like, nope, he's got to go back to bed again. And then there's that last bit where he finally comes out of the TARDIS and deals with everything, and it's like 5-10 minutes worth of stuff. I still don't feel connected to the 10th Doctor yet. Some of the stuff is fine, I guess. I think the Sycorax are a cool design of villain, but they don't really do that much. Nice seeing Harriet Jones again, and I do like her overarching story throughout, well, the Russell T Davies era, really. Rose is obviously going through the whole, but it's not the Doctor, which I can kind of accept a little bit, because during this time period, Christopher Eccleston was the only Doctor that people would have seen. In terms of, well, my generation especially. So I can let that slide a little bit, but it does get grating after a while. And overall, I mean, it's a Christmas special. I don't fucking like them anyway. Now these next 8, this is a tough list now for me. I enjoy all of these stories, but again, like I mentioned before, I'm doing it on the basis of most likely to rewatch. So next, I'm gonna have to go with Rose. This was obviously the episode that introduced us back to the world of Doctor Who. Introduced us to a brand new Doctor, brand new companion, brand new style of show. But the reason why I've put it down so low, and I don't like that I put it down so low, the main thing is, if I want to watch an episode from Series 1, I'm probably not picking this one for a while. It is lower down on my list of stories from Series 1, and that's probably the only reason. Like, nothing that this story does is inherently wrong, nothing about this story is inherently bad. It's just plain and simply, I prefer the other stories that I'm going to talk about, and I'm much more likely to throw them into the DVD player. I say throw, put them in sensibly, because I don't want to scratch the discs, but you get what I mean. Next up, Deep Breath. Now this is one that has grown on me, to be fair. Like, if you've seen my Series 8 review, you'll know that that series as a whole has gone up in my estimations, and Deep Breath is no exception. I used to think that this was a load of rubbish, and whilst it isn't perfect, there's a lot I do like about it. I like the fact, for a change, we're actually in a different time period of London, particularly for a Doctor's first story as well. It seems like up until this point it's always the modern day. I do like the fact that the Clockwork robots are back and are the villain. I really wish they got to do a little bit more, but I really love that sort of gothic steampunk vibe that I get from this story. I think it really emphasises Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor as well. Now, I used to say that Into the Dalek was probably the moment where I started to really like him as the Doctor, but if I think about it, it's probably in this episode. I love that scene in the restaurant. I think it's hysterical, and I think throughout the entire episode, yes, he does do the darker Doctor stuff, which I'll get to in a sec, but the humorous side of the 12th Doctor is really on show here. Like I mentioned, the restaurant scene, the scene where he's arguing with the guy in the alleyway, the bit where he's just moaning about the human race, like all that sort of stuff, I thoroughly enjoy it. But then you get the darker stuff towards the end, and it's the whole did he push him or did he fall? I really really loved that, and even though it didn't really go where I wanted it to and it just sort of fell flat towards the end, the setup was there and I absolutely loved it. Now we're going to go to the very first story of Doctor Who, which is An Unearthly Child. This is a tricky one because I do think, having rewatched it recently, I do think it's better than what I initially gave it credit for. I will say that episode 1 is borderline perfection anyway. It's just the rest of the story I always sort of was like, it's just a bit boring, it's just a bit of fluff. But I think you have to give it the context of the time. This was the very first story, so even though we're used to all the big spaceships and planets and monsters and everything, at the time people weren't, so the whole novelty of we're in a different time period would have been just as incredible as some of the stuff that we got later on. But the first episode for me is what really makes this, well, what really puts this where it is on this list. Plain and simply, delving into the Doctor's world from the perspective of an outsider I think is fantastic, and you really do get the sense of something isn't right and something is really weird about that Susan kid. And it's the fact that these two teachers even bothered to care enough, because I mean, when I was at school, the teachers probably wouldn't give a shit. They'd just be like, yeah, they're a bit weird them. Anyway, whereas with this, that investigative side of them takes over, and then when you see the TARDIS in the junkyard and you see the inside of the ship for the very first time, and that exciting cliffhanger of where are we now, what's happening, this is insane, I absolutely love. And yes, the rest of the story isn't amazing, but it is actually very watchable, so I will say that. Plus it's the first story, I'm always going to have a little bit of a soft spot for it. Now I'm going to mention the TV movie, or The Enemy from Within, I think, or The Enemy Within, I think that was the original title of it. Some people might be very confused as to why this is as high up as it is. However, even though I did a video where I was like, yeah, I'm kind of glad this didn't go to a series, I really like the TV movie. I don't think it's perfect. I think the first 2/3 are really good, and then the final third lets it down. However, having said that, I enjoy the whole thing. And whilst I don't think that this is necessarily a better story than some of the others that I've already mentioned, I enjoy it more, and I think that's the important thing. I enjoy Paul McGann's Doctor, I enjoy seeing his character develop, I enjoy, to be fair, even being somewhere else as opposed to London. I think the design and the aesthetic of this thing is really well done as well. I love the TARDIS, and even though he is very camp and over the top, particularly towards the end, Eric Roberts is an interesting take on the Master. Not necessarily good, but interesting to the point where I can watch him and appreciate that he's doing something slightly different. Particularly when he does have some very creepy moments. The bit in particular where he peels his nail off, I don't really like that from a sort of, ooh, sort of way, but I do like it from a plot perspective, showing you just how warped this guy is. In terms of the lore and stuff, this thing is fucked, but I can look over it and just appreciate what this actually is. Paul McGann carries it, absolutely. But I fucking love Paul McGann's Doctor. Next up, Robot. This is a weird story for me because it isn't a Tom Baker story, is it? But I think that's partially the reason why I like this as much as I do. Because this is very much a Pertwee era story, it emphasises how different Tom's Doctor truly is to his predecessor. And even though it is just a Pertwee story with Tom Baker in it, it's still a very good story. It's not groundbreaking or anything, but I really love it. I love the humorous moments. I think part 1 in particular has some of the funniest moments in Doctor Who. The whole costume change where Tom's flicking through all these different outfits, like the Jester and the playing card one. I laugh every single time. I love the skipping rope scene with Harry. All throughout this story, Tom just shines and shows you that this guy really is an alien. I think it's especially cool as well seeing the differences between like the interactions with the Brigadier, the interactions with Sarah, with Benton even. And I've got to say as well, the giant robot itself is pretty fucking good. Yes, it does look a bit silly because bits of it disappear when it's growing massive because of the yellow screen behind it. However, the actual design of it and the plot of it, yes, it is very King Kong, but I really like it. And you do feel sympathy for the robot, and you realise that the real villain isn't actually this robot. He's just being manipulated. It's actually these bastards over here. I mean, there's that laughable bit with the tank as well, but we forget that because it is actually a very good story. Underrated, actually. That's the main thing I'll say about Robot. It's very underrated. I think people often overlook this one when, well, part of the best season of Who, if you ask me. Now we move into the top 3. So I'm going to go with The 11th Hour. I just love this from start to finish. Like, I was really unsure about the Matt Smith era because I grew up with David Tennant, so I was like, I don't really like this guy. But this story's amazing. It's fast paced, there's a lot going on, it feels like everything is utilised perfectly. Like, we don't focus on stuff for too long or for too little. I think Matt Smith's performance is really, really strong in this one. I really love the setup of Karen Gillan and, you know, Amy Pond and Rory, as well as like the crack in the wall. There's a few brief mentions of a few other plot points as well that won't get resolved in a satisfying way, but they're set up quite well in this. Prisoner Zero isn't really the best villain ever. However, the Atraxi are a really interesting design, and I do appreciate that, because I'm very sick of seeing generic humanoid shaped things that are made out to be an alien. Like, it happened a lot in Russell's era. Like, the Jadoon, they're space police, but they're just humans with rhino heads. You got them fly things in Planet of the Dead as well, so it was nice to see an alien that looks like it is a fucking alien. I really love the fact that they use time travel in this as well, and it's an interesting way to set up a companion, because the Doctor meets her as a kid, and he's like, I'll be back in a minute. Where the fuck? Who are you? Why are you like 6 foot tall now? Weren't you a kid a minute ago? I actually really enjoyed that, and I especially love the fact that when he comes back again after he's had a quick hop to the moon, he's still left her for another 2 years. That is exactly something that the Doctor would do, and it's fucking hysterical. I could honestly watch this one over and over again. This is such a fantastic opener to a series, and this is probably one of the reasons why Series 5 is my favourite of the modern era, because it just starts off so strong. I don't think that it really dips in quality all that much. This set the bar for the Matt Smith era, and unfortunately I don't think it could keep it up. I think Series 6 onwards proves that, in my opinion at least, that Moffat sort of burnt himself out a little bit. But hey, I'm not complaining, we still got this. So, only 2 more stories left. Now, this was really difficult. This was really, really difficult, because the last 2 stories I fucking love, and I think are some of the best. In second place, I'm gonna have to go with Power of the Daleks. In fairness though, I didn't really appreciate Power of the Daleks for a good few years, so the fact that it's here now, like teetering on the top spot, just shows how good this story really is. Unfortunately, we don't have it anymore, so it is animated, and I do think that the special edition that was released recently is the superior version. Well, you'd hope, because they redid the animation, so if it was worse, fucking hell. But this story I just love. It emphasises how much of a bastard the Daleks are. They're really scheming, they're really conniving. I just love 60s Daleks. I just think that they get it so right. They're really chilling, the way that that Dalek keeps talking over the Doctor, saying, I am your servant, constantly. It shows how much of a manipulator they really are as well, because these people just fall for it, and it's not until the very end that they're like, fuck, maybe we should have listened to that bloke. The descent of Lesterson as well, I think, is incredible. I love seeing him go from this like happy-go-lucky budding scientist to having a fucking mental breakdown. But of course, this is Patrick Troughton's first story, and he had the hardest job out of all of the Doctors, yet he nailed it. I really wish I could physically see Patrick Troughton's first performance as the Doctor, because I think it would have been really special. From the bits that you do get from the animation, don't get me wrong, it is really good, obviously second in my list, but the point is to physically see it. I think because it's animated, you do lose something. It can't be helped, because some knobhead junked it. I don't know who it was, but I don't even know if they're alive. Or, well, actually, if one of the relatives is watching and you know for a fact that they junked Power of the Daleks or any of the other 60s Doctor Who stories, call them a cunt from me, because why would you do that? You deprived us of arguably one of the most definitive moments in television, where we got to see a brand new Doctor for the first time in a fucking good story. It's not like this is shit. This is actually a very good story, and now we can't see it. Don't get me wrong, praise to the animators. You brought it back. Go you. But that other cunt, fuck him. I forgot where I was going now. I really like Power of the Daleks, so we'll stick with that. But of course, in number 1, it's Spearhead from Space. I just fucking love this from start to finish. It kind of reminds me of a new series story, and in a way, almost like the 11th Hour, in the sense of it feels very fast paced. It feels like everything is sort of happening. It doesn't feel like things are happening too long or too short an amount of time. I also just love the fact, and I know that they couldn't avoid this, but for some reason it just really makes it, because I don't know how many people notice this. I don't know if it's just because I'm like a nerd with this sort of stuff, but there is a difference between the video cameras and the film cameras. Now, this story was filmed purely on film, which around the time I believe wasn't standard practice. Well, obviously, because they didn't film Doctor Who like that. But the fact that this has that film quality to it, I know it's only a little thing, and it is purely an aesthetic thing, but it really emphasises how good this story actually looks. Plus, because it's on film, they can scale it up for Blu-ray as well, which is fucking awesome. I do admit I don't necessarily like how the Brigadier is very sort of stubborn, because he has seen some stuff at this point. However, I also admit that, well, obviously he's not going to believe this random guy who has a totally different face would be the same guy that he met a few years ago. However, I still love their interactions and I love their dynamic, and it is the start of what would be one of the most beautiful things in Doctor Who, which is the Doctor just berating the Brigadier constantly. The Autons make their debut in this story as well, and fuck me, are they a good villain. There's some really cool, just iconic moments in this story with them. Like, honestly, the bit where they break out of the shop and they're just terrorizing people by the bus stop is so 70s, but I fucking love it. And it's really creepy in places as well. Like, there's a guy who's just chilling in the tent and then they come in and kill him, and it's like, oh my god. And like the mask, honestly, I don't know if they were actual shop window dummies from the 1970s, but if they were, fucking hell, they're terrifying. I wouldn't buy any clothes that one of them was wearing. The music in this is great as well, and I do love the fact that at the end of the story the Doctor gets attacked by a weird squid thing. What more could you possibly want? I think this just sets up the Jon Pertwee era and this new direction that the show's going into perfectly. I think with some stories that I've mentioned, it feels very much same old, same old. It feels like they're still harking back a little bit to the previous era. Whereas this, it feels very much like, nope, this is where Doctor Who is at now, like it or lump it. And I like it. Jon Pertwee's just amazing in this story. I don't know if I said that already, but I'll say it again. Jon Pertwee's amazing in this story. If there's any Jon Pertwee story that I will always revisit, it's probably going to be this one. It's not my favourite, but I'll always revisit it because it's just top fucking stuff, isn't it? In the comments below though, guys, let me know what you think. Do you agree with my choices? Do you not? Whatever they are, let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like on it, subscribe for more because I want 10k. Social media and Patreon links will be in the description as always, so if you'd follow me on any of those things, I'd absolutely love you forever. But till next time, guys, you take care of yourself. Goodbye.